Canada hopes for relief on steel and aluminum tariffs. U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick is reportedly rejecting any possibility of a deal on the auto sector.
Listening to Howard Lutnick this week saying he wanted to destroy the Canadian automobile industry, but trying to make sure that Canadians have no choice but to buy American cars.
Prime Minister to do exactly what Beijing has offered, which would be to drop the 100% tariffs on EVs in exchange for them to drop those 100% tariffs on canola products.
It started quietly. No breaking news, no loud headlines, just a whisper from across the Pacific. While Washington shouted about tariffs, trade wars, and America first, another voice was calling. Calm, confident, and strategic. That voice was China. China's ambassador to Canada made an unexpected offer. Drop your tariffs on Chinese-made electric vehicles, and we'll drop ours on Canadian canola. A simple deal on paper, but one that could shift the balance of power across North America.
China's ambassador to Canada saying canola tariffs will be dropped if Canada drops its tariffs on Chinese-made electric vehicles.
For decades, Canada's economy moved in lockstep with the United States, their largest and most trusted ally. But when Washington started slapping tariffs on cars, steel, and aluminum, the foundation of that partnership began to crack. Behind closed doors, Canadian leaders started asking the unthinkable question: what if Canada no longer followed America's lead? In early October, tensions exploded. At a high-profile business forum in Toronto, U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick dropped a bombshell. When it comes to vehicle production, it's America first, Canada second. The message hit like thunder, not just words, but a threat. Washington was preparing a 25% tariff on cars and auto parts coming from Canada. For Ontario, the beating heart of Canada's auto industry, it was a disaster waiting to happen. Nearly 500,000 jobs depend on the U.S.-Canada supply chain, a system so deeply connected that every car built in Ontario carries parts stamped "Made in America." Now that connection was under attack. Economists warned billions could vanish from Canada's exports. Factories would slow, layoffs would rise, and even U.S. automakers would suffer from higher production costs. But Washington didn't care. The message was clear: build in America or don't build at all. That was the moment Canada realized loyalty had its limits. For years, Canada had mirrored U.S. trade policy, even matching Washington's 100% tariffs on Chinese EVs. But instead of being rewarded, Canada got punished. While Washington tightened its grip, Beijing saw an opening. China began to reach out, not with threats, but with opportunity. They offered to reopen markets for Canadian agriculture, explore clean energy cooperation, and welcome Canadian investment into its booming EV sector. Then came the real offer, one that made Ottawa stop and think. Lift your tariffs on Chinese EVs, priced at just $35,000 to $40,000, and we'll drop ours on your canola. For Canada's farmers, who had been shut out of China's billion-person market, this was a lifeline. For consumers, it meant cheaper EVs and progress toward climate goals. And for Beijing, it was a masterstroke. Because as Washington slammed its doors shut, China was quietly opening new ones. Inside Ottawa, the debate was fierce. Was this a smart economic move or a dangerous geopolitical gamble? Leaning toward China risked angering Washington. But staying too loyal to the U.S. meant sacrificing billions and depending on a partner who clearly put America first. Diversifying trade was no longer a dream. It was survival. China wasn't replacing the United States, but it was offering leverage that Canada hadn't had in decades. By mid-October, the shift became visible. Prime Minister Mark Carney's government rolled out new funding for manufacturing and energy. Trying to shield the country from U.S. pressure on Ontario's premier, Doug Ford announced programs to protect auto workers and save jobs. And while Canada lifted some retaliatory tariffs to signal peace, it made one thing clear: a 25% tariff on American-made cars would remain. That was the line Canada refused to cross. For the first time in a generation, Ottawa was charting its own course. not just as Washington's loyal neighbor, but as a country ready to balance between two global powers. The world's stage was shifting, and in that silence, amid trade wars, electric cars, and fields of canola, Canada was quietly rewriting its future. The message from Ottawa was firm, but balanced. Canada wasn't trying to pick a fight. It was simply refusing to be cornered. Behind polished speeches and diplomatic smiles, a quiet revolution was unfolding, one that would redefine how smaller nations survive between giants. They called it Sectoral Resilience, a new strategy designed to protect Canada's economy by spreading risk, one deal at a time. No massive trade pact, no blind loyalty to a single power. Instead, smaller, smarter partnerships across multiple regions. The goal was simple: never depend on one country again. That mindset aligned perfectly with China's playbook. As Beijing reached out, Canadian companies in EVs, batteries, and minerals began looking east. Chinese firms, hungry for Canada's lithium and nickel, were eager to invest. And what emerged wasn't defiance, it was pragmatism. Strength through flexibility, not dependence. Meanwhile, south of the border, Trump's trade crusade was starting to backfire. According to the U.S. Department of Commerce, prices for steel and aluminum had already spiked by nearly 20% since early 2025. Car prices climbed, profits shrank, and factories in Michigan and Ohio, the heart of American manufacturing, began slowing down. Economists warned that every 10% increase in tariffs was cutting Midwest manufacturing output by nearly 2%. The math didn't lie. What was supposed to make America stronger was starting to weaken it. The White House had hoped to consolidate power. Instead, it was isolating itself. Across the border, Canada's message was clear. We're not rebelling, we're surviving. Ottawa wasn't trying to abandon Washington, but years of tariffs, threats, and uncertainty had left it no choice. So Canada began quietly redrawing its economic map, diversifying routes, building domestic resilience, and searching for new partners beyond America's shadow. The results were already visible. Exports to Asia were rising. Talks with China hinted at broader cooperation, and a new realization was spreading through Canada's boardrooms and farmlands alike. Depending on one market, no matter how large, can turn into a trap overnight. Trump's policies had revealed an uncomfortable truth. You can't build strength through intimidation. While Washington measured power in control, Canada started measuring it in options. And if Beijing's partnership continued to deepen, the United States wasn't just losing trade, it was losing trust. That same dynamic began echoing across the Pacific. Trump's strategy to rebuild American dominance was, paradoxically, strengthening America's rivals instead. The administration boasted about billions flowing into the U.S. economy, but behind those headlines, something else was happening. America's allies were walking away. Long-standing friendships, once built on trust, were cracking under the weight of protectionism. In Japan, frustration was impossible to hide. Tokyo's officials had gone public. The U.S. trade deal remained incomplete. Sure, Washington agreed to drop auto tariffs from 25% to 15%, but crucial sectors, pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, and biotech, were left unresolved. Without them, Japan said flatly, there can be no deal. Behind closed doors, it got worse. Washington asked Japan to invest 550 billion yen to help rebuild U.S. industries like shipbuilding and pharmaceuticals. From the U.S. side, it was framed as partnership. From Japan's side, it felt like tribute. Officials in Tokyo feared a dangerous precedent: pay to play. Business leaders called the talks rushed, unclear, and one-sided. Until the details were transparent, Japan refused to sign. That resistance marked a rare moment in modern diplomacy. Japan openly pushing back against its biggest ally. The consequences were immediate. Investment slowed, joint projects froze, and Japan began to quietly question whether Washington still understood the meaning of partnership. For America, the cost wasn't just economic, it was moral. It was the slow erosion of trust from an ally that once anchored U.S. influence across Asia. Then came South Korea. President Lee Jung took a bold stance. No trade deal will be approved if it undermines our national interests. Washington's response? A threat. If Seoul refused to comply, the U.S. would restore tariffs on Korean exports. Back to 25% Korean media didn't mince words. They called it an ultimatum, not a negotiation. The proposed deal involved a $350 billion investment in U.S. industries, but Washington wanted full control of structure and profits. That demand fueled outrage across Seoul's political and business circles. And then, the breaking point. Earlier this year, during a raid at a Hyundai plant under construction in Georgia, U.S. authorities detained several Korean engineers working on site. The news hit Seoul like a shockwave. The media called it a public humiliation, a sign that American policy had become unpredictable and unsafe. Economists said the raid left a deep scar on Korea's confidence, a wound that may take years to heal. And then, as the world watched, both leaders took the stage. Prime Minister Mark Carney, calm and composed; Trump, fiery and restless. Carney spoke in facts: trade figures, manufacturing goals, job numbers. Trump bounced between topics: cars, borders, even Venezuelan drug routes. A chaotic mix that left reporters scrambling to follow. When Trump declared that $17 trillion in investment had entered the U.S. in just 8 months, the Bureau of Economic Analysis quickly corrected him. The real number was less than $500 billion for the entire year. The message was clear. The louder Washington shouted about strength, the more its influence slipped away. From Ottawa to Seoul, allies were no longer following orders. They were making choices. Choices that said one thing loud and clear: the era of unconditional loyalty to the United States is ending, and in its place, a new world is emerging, one built not on power, but on options. The age of dominance is fading. The world is no longer asking who leads, it's asking who listens. And in that silence, new alliances are forming, quietly, patiently, reshaping the global order.